Alright, everybody, here we are for Mining for Meaning number 6, Circular Reality. I think we figured out most of the glitches when it comes to the video portion. I guess we'll find out as we do this. But for this edition of Mining for Meaning while playing Minecraft in the background, we're going to be reading a story called Circular Reality. It's relatively short, it's only 5,400 words, but it kind of makes you question the whole concept of reality itself. And so it's a little fun one to go through. So, without any more introduction than that, Circular Reality. Section 1-2. It was just after 1 in the morning, well after the end of her midnight shift, when Charlotte finally got home from work. Charlotte was 20-something, just shy of overweight. A few years working as a delivery driver for a pizza chain had left her with too many leftovers on too many nights. Once, she had been a star athlete, but she discovered that simply graduating high school didn't open many work opportunities, unless she was willing to apply at a local strip joint, which she wasn't. Charlotte's Ford Focus was originally red when she'd bought it 5 years ago, but the hood had been replaced with a black one when she'd rear-ended an idiot who had stopped too quickly in front of her, and her front passenger door was now white thanks to a random elk T-boning her a couple years ago while she was on a delivery. Insurance had covered the first, though they'd almost doubled her rates, but it didn't even touch the second. To top it off, it sounded like someone was slaughtering a pig in the engine tonight as she pulled into the guest parking of her 2-story apartment building. She would have preferred to park in space 13, the one for her apartment, but someone, not one of her 2 roommates, had apparently decided that no one was coming home tonight, which meant the spot was free. She grabbed the wadded work shirt from off the passenger seat and climbed out. Touching the shirt sent a disgusted chill down Charlotte's spine. It was covered in sweat, grease, pizza sauce, and a tiny dried up pieces of cheese. To top it off, even though it was one of the least revealing things she owned, it seemed like she couldn't make a single delivery without some man staring 8 inches below her eyes. These men wouldn't even look at her twice at a bar, but show up alone at the front door with food, and everyone thought she must be on the menu too. Tonight had been one of the worst Fridays Charlotte had ever seen. On a normal Friday, the store had an average of 150 total orders, including the lunch rush. But tonight they'd hit almost 300. When he'd done the scheduling, Charlotte's boss had drastically underestimated how popular the convention RoboCon was going to be. 1,000 people had flooded the hotels with inventors, geeks, nerds, children, and tech companies, all bent on seeing or showing the decade's greatest artificial intelligence. So, the store had been severely understaffed for the demand, and suddenly all of the employees with the night off couldn't find their phones when they were being called in. The final orders of the night had come in at 11:55, just 5 minutes before the store was technically closed. The bastards. The one saving grace was that no one in that last rush had ordered wings. Charlotte, in what little free time there had been at the end of the night, had already cleaned and shut off the fryer by then, and it was a huge pain in the ass to turn it back on just for a single order. By the time she got back from the delivery, finished up the dishes, she'd have to thank her boss tomorrow for helping her with that, and mopped the floors, it was almost 1:45. When she got to the apartment, she found that the door had been left unlocked again, by her roommates who, coincidentally, weren't home. Probably out bar hopping, Charlotte grumbled, slamming the door shut. She definitely needed to sit them down and have a chat about home security. There was a lot of expensive shit in the apartment, and she didn't have renter's insurance. The last thing she needed was to go through a police report again. She'd already been robbed once a few years ago in a different part of town, and none of that stuff had ever been recovered. She moved quickly through the 3-bedroom apartment and gathered some dirty clothes from her bedroom before tossing them, and the grimy work shirt, into a 30-year-old washing machine that had come with the place. The decals of the dials had faded away even before Charlotte had moved in, but as long as she didn't move any of them, her clothes came out clean enough. While waiting for the wash, and for her roommates, she was a light sleeper and was sure that she'd wake up the instant they came home, Charlotte decided to spend some time playing a video game, The Land of Rom. There was a beer in the fridge, not hers, but it would make up for the unlocked front door, and a couple slices of pizza, which she heated up in the microwave for a minute. As the pizza cooked, Charlotte stepped outside for a quick smoke. She could feel the grains in her eyes reflecting the embers of her cigarette as she stared out across the parking lot. The man with the patchwork beard over in apartment 18 was screaming at his wife, his voice reduced to the wah wah wahs of a Charlie Brown cartoon, which was nothing new, but otherwise the place was mostly quiet. The fluorescent lights flickered and buzzed, blocking out both the stars and the sounds of traffic on the street below. When she finished her smoke, she flicked the cigarette onto the windshield of the car parked in her space, then went inside, grabbed the pizza, and sat down at the couch. The lights she left off. There's just something more enjoyable about playing a game in the dark. Maybe it was the fact that the lack of light forced her attention on the only television screen. Maybe it was because the darkness brought out the colors of the game. Or maybe it was because she was tired, and she thought the light bulbs her roommates had bought were too bright, and she knew they'd hurt her eyes. Either way, when the game loaded up, Charlotte selected her character, Lotar the Barbarian. She stared at the loading screen as the game loaded up Lotar's last location. Section 2-3. Lotar the Barbarian found himself outside the small city of Lakeside, which is located on the northeastern edge of Unity Lake. Try as he might, however, Lotar simply could not remember what he was doing there. He was a giant of a man, almost 6.5 feet tall, every inch of it covered with muscle. He wore nothing but brown shorts and a pair of badly worn shoes, but there was a great axe strapped to his back, and his long red hair was dancing in the breeze coming off the lake. He spins in a circle, taking in the view, breathing in the scent of pine and pollen. Something had drawn him here. Something important. From the town arose screams of terror. That's right, he thought. I was here to help the town from something. He rushes toward the small settlement, bounding over the dirt road in great leaps. Lakeside was one of the few towns that had been built with the idea of bringing all the 5 civilized races to Rom together in a single settlement. Humans brushed shoulders with Petramen, 3-foot-tall living statues, who chatted idly with the repented Elegani, who used to be masters of the 3 slave races. In Lakeside, the people found strength in unity, rather than being divided by their differences. So what was terrorizing a community like this? And why had they asked for Lotar's help? Lotar follows the nearest screams to a dark alley. A woman is holding a small child behind her with one hand, while swinging a short stick wildly in the other. In front of her, a skeleton, its bones bleached white, staggers toward her, its arms extended. The skull is caught in a permanent grin as some dark and unholy magic animates the bones. Without stopping to think, which was never his strength anyway, Lotar leaps forward and draws his axe. He slashes out, catching the skeleton at the neck, and sends the skull rolling through the alley. Ha! Lotar celebrates. You are welcome, young mistress. Look out, you idiot, she cries, pointing. The headless skeleton has turned around to face the new threat. A sword that Lotar had not seen was in the skeletal hand, and it jabs towards Lotar's unprotected stomach. Sorcery! Lotar exclaims, dodging backward and lashing out with his axe. One of the undead's arms, the one not holding the sword, falls to the ground, where it inches its way towards Lotar's feet by using its finger bones to pull the rest of the arm forward. In a frenzy, Lotar begins chopping wildly, sending bits of bones to the ground, off the walls, and into flower pots on the windowsills. But the pieces keep fighting their way toward the barbarian. The woman rolls her eyes, steps over to the skeleton's skull, and smashes it with her stick. With the skull destroyed, the rest of the body falls to the ground and begins dissolving into dust. Lotar smiles at her and says, You are welcome, fair maiden. How may Lotar serve you? The woman just stares at him blankly for a moment. Go help the others, she suggests. Only then did Lotar realize that he could hear more screams coming from other areas of the city. Lotar smiles at the woman, who continues to hold the small child behind her in a protective stance, then rushes off into town. Lotar's blade is chipped and slightly dulled by the time the screaming stops. There had been dozens of similar incidents all through the town. In most cases, he managed to save the citizens. But in some instances, he failed, and the fallen townspeople got up to join the skeletons against him. He really wasn't sure how to deal with the undead. Lotar is the kind of man who swings his axe first and asks questions later. But how was he to kill something that was already dead? It took him far longer to complete the task than he'd desired, but at least it was done. In a small way, Lothar was disappointed in the battle. He was used to coming out of a fight smelling of the blood, sweat, and tears of his enemies. Yet tonight, all he could smell was himself, and he definitely needed a dousing in the nearest river. In the dead of the night, Lothar finds the mayor of Lakeside standing in the town square. "What caused all of this?" Lothar demands. "It was the necromancer Blithblade," the mayor replies. "He demands money every month from the populace to offer his protection. Anytime someone doesn't pay, he sends his skeletons into town to harass or kill them." "I see," Lothar states. "Where might I find this bright blade?" "Blithblade," the mayor responds. "And he lives in the great tower on the edge of town." "You mean the one decorated with skulls and populated with cawing crows?" "No, I mean the one filled with fluffy pink pillows and rivers of gold. Yes, that tower." "Do not fear," Lothar tells the man. "I will rid this town of the monster." Without another word, Lothar runs toward the giant tower that had somehow escaped his notice until the moment the mayor mentioned it. As he approaches, the crows begin calling out, their caws mixed with snippets of words. Words like death, fear, and fool. They flutter back and forth among the skeletal gargoyles that hang off the black stone walls of the tower, sending individual feathers to the ground in a light rain. Lothar can only see one entrance into the ominous tower, a wooden door that shows signs of rot. Lothar kicks the door, and the old wood shatters into 1,000 splinters that burst inward. A gust of air explodes out of the tower, past Lothar and into the night, carrying the rot of the tomb with every breath. When Lothar storms inside, however, he finds only a single room with no ceiling. The air simply extends up and up and up until it reaches the top of the tower. The single room is filled with tables that are covered in books, bottles, and various artifacts whose uses Lothar cannot even begin to fathom. "You have got to be kidding me," a voice wheezes from the floor of the middle of the room. An old man dressed in flowing black robes lays on his back, sickly sweet blood slipping out of his chest and onto the marble floors. There are multiple small pieces of wood sticking at all odd angles out of his chest, including a rather large one in the center which vibrates every couple seconds to the beat of the dying man's heart. "Are you all right?" Lothar asks the man, stepping up to him and kneeling down. "A door?" the elder pants. "After finally unearthing the tome, I was going to be the master of all worlds, and I'm brought down by an idiot and a door?" "Who are you?" Lothar demands. But the improvised stake has stopped vibrating, and the man no longer draws breath. Slowly at first, but then moving faster, the old man's skin begins dissolving into dust, leaving only the skeleton behind. Lothar jumps back, his recent experience with skeletons still fresh in his mind, and slams the butt of his axe against the skull of the skeleton. When it cracks open, an angelic chime fills the room. Lothar looks up to see where the sound is coming from, his axe held ready. And when he looks back down, the old man's skeleton has vanished. In his place sits an old wooden chest outlined in gold and silver. "What have we here?" Lothar asks, opening the chest. Inside he finds a small pouch filled with gold, which makes its way to the pockets of Lothar's shorts, and a large book that carries the scent of age and loam. Lothar had never been that great at reading. The letters tended to dance on the page like a group of circus performers. But, the way he figures it, who needs to read when you have an axe? He tries to set the book back in the chest, but something makes him open the book up instead. To his disappointment, there aren't any pictures inside of the musty old tome. To make matters worse, the writing in the book is in some language he'd never seen before. He turns the book to its side, then holds it upside down. Nothing helps. Thankfully, however, whoever the old man who'd owned the book he had been making translations of the paragraphs into the common tongue. "A trip through the stars," Lothar reads slowly, each word bouncing off the stone walls of the room. "Zilak's Guide to Habitable Planets." Sweat from the effort of reading starts to bead on Lothar's head, but he continues to read anyway, as if possessed. Section 3-4. Our homeworld, Pilak, is dying. Although over the last several centuries we have spread across our arm of the galaxy, most of our people still live on Pilak. We thought we'd acted fast enough to stop the damage our ancestors had done to the environment, but we missed something. Some small piece that, once gone, brought the ecosystem down to its knees in layers. Now we need to find a new home. Hundreds of explorers have been ordered to find a planet suitable to house billions. This is no mean feat. Despite thousands of planets in our realm, very few of them have the right conditions to support that many of our people. This task would be infinitely easier if not for the Drix, a half-humanoid, half-cybernetic race that hails from the darkness near the center of the galaxy. Like a shadow, they are slowly spreading out. As the most advanced and evolved race of the galaxy, we alone must put up a unified front to keep them at bay, and we can't do that without our homeworld. I only hope we can complete our task quickly. In an effort to categorize the habitable planets of our galaxy, I, Zilak the Cartographer, am documenting my notes here on antiquated paper rather than in the computer. It is my belief that if the Drix attempt to board the ship and download the computer's archive for the information, they will overlook this book. Today, on Galaxy Date 18764, I, Zilak the Cartographer, swear to uphold all information contained within this, for lack of a better term, diary, as soon as I return to the home planet. I will begin with PX-13. It can be found in the nebulous solar system in the third arm of our spiral galaxy. It is located about halfway up the arm and is a red planet with only 30% water. It is inhabited by a humanoid race. The inhabitants are extremely strong for their size and appear to be very territorial of the few large freshwater deposits available. They appear to work in tribes or clans. There is evidence that both water and females are claimed during territorial disputes, indicating a patriarchal society. The people are pre-industrial, although they seem to have advanced beyond the Iron Age, and their weapons are made of blacksmith metal. It is my opinion that these creatures would make excellent slave labor for our people, and we should start sending collection units there as soon as possible. Once we find a planet that will be able to contain the bulk of our people, we will need labor crews to build our habitations so that we can focus on more important issues. The next habitable planet I came across was PX-58. It is twice the size of our homeworld, which will make gravity an issue until we can get some modulation units installed. Perhaps use the people from PX-13. The planet is 80% water. Of that, 60% is salt water. There does not appear to be any form of intelligent life on the planet, though there are some remains of basic structures that tell me that there was a people here at one point that never advanced farther than basic architecture. What caused the decline of these peoples is not immediately clear, although the fauna might be a factor. The animal life seems to be very large and very dangerous. They have thick skins, multiple limbs, and a variety of claws, razor-sharp teeth, and bone spurs that turn them into extreme death machines. It might be possible to tame these creatures to use against the Drix, but if that is not a possibility, a few extinction units should be able to clear the planet up enough to allow us to use it as a farming community. While we have enough food for now, it never hurts to be prepared for a shortfall. On PX-135, I was forced to use a cloaking device. There is a blue planet in the Black Star solar system that contains a semi-advanced species. The planet is slightly smaller than our homeworld, about 86% of the size, and it is nearly 70% water. Almost all of it is salt water, however, which makes it unsuitable for our own people unless we install a large number of water purifiers. The people are in the digital age and have made some childlike forays into the space immediately around their atmosphere, with at least one trip as far as the closest of their 4 moons. The people, however, only appear to be average in strength and intelligence. It is my suggestion that if we use this planet, we use them as a servant class, as they would be incapable of continual forced labor. They might also be good as a frontline defense against the Drix if we give them some of our cheaper weapons. They appear to be smart enough to operate the basic controls, and would help to save the lives of some of our people. It was PX-757, however, that was the most interesting find. It is a dark planet with no solar system of its own. The planet floats in a long orbit around the center of the galaxy, moving from one arm of the galaxy to the next, and borrowing light from any sun it passes. Of all the strangest parts of this planet, the apparent lack of any Drix activity is the most unusual. There is evidence of a highly advanced civilization that once lived here. I won't put this into the official computer file, but I would argue that they were even more advanced than we are now. There is, however, no sign of that life now. What is left is a planet with an automated atmosphere that is 90% machinery. What each machine does is impossible to determine with a cursory inspection. My computer is simply not advanced enough to pull information without an extended stay, which I am reluctant to do at this time. I strongly suggest, no, I demand that a research team be dispatched to PX 757 as soon as possible. I did manage to tap into one of their computer systems before leaving, however. It would appear that I downloaded some files from an immense library. My computer is decoding the books now. At the moment, only one has been partially translated, and it is impossible to determine what part of the book, beginning, middle, or end, I am looking at. I will include part of the translation here so that others may see what the first book we found from this ancient people was. Section 4-5. Black clouds ambled slowly to the north, temporarily blocking out the twin suns and a rare moment of shade on the dust bowl of a planet. Other than the continual whine of the desert wind, the town of Gravestone was as silent as a whisper. Only moments before, when the suns had been beating down on the town like the red-hot branding irons of the moisture ranchers, the town's wooden buildings had echoed with the thunderous cracks of two green stone rods. In a ritual as old as time itself, two men stood in the middle of the main street facing each other. Both were dressed in dark brown coats with hats whose brims extended a foot beyond their heads, and both had their weapons pointed at the other. Even the breeze paused, as if the town itself was holding its breath to see what the outcome would be. The black clouds moved away from the suns, and light flooded back into Gravestone. With aching slowness, one of the men's knees buckled, and he tumbled to his back, dead. The street drank up his blood as quickly as it emptied out of the dead man, staining the road's lips red. Cheers erupted from within the wooden buildings as people dressed in their Sunday best poured out into the street or waved their arms through the window holes. The water thief and outlaw Dinlaw was dead. It had taken 3 different men in his position to finally do it, but Peacekeeper Slynn had finally freed the town of the worst man to ever foul the planet. Men and women both gathered around Dinlaw to spit on his dead body. It was the worst disgrace the people of Gravestone knew, to hate someone so much they'd rather waste their precious mouthwater than let the offender go free. Of course, their curses and disrespect didn't mean much to Dinlaw. His soul, if he ever had one, was already on its way to the gap between the suns, where he'd be forever tormented by the raging solar flares. His body, meanwhile, would be dumped in a gully somewhere to be forgotten, if he wasn't ground up and used as fertilizer for the community garden. The townspeople didn't know which they'd rather do. On the one hand, Dinlaw didn't deserve to help the community in any way, and no one wanted it. On the other hand, it seemed a shame to waste a body, even his body, when the plants needed nourishment. Before a decision could be considered, there was a cry from the other end of the street. The peacekeeper hadn't managed to avoid being hit after all. Slynn was on one knee, his hand pressed to his stomach. But whatever pressure he was putting on his wound was not enough, as blood was seeping through his fingers and dripping onto the street. "Get him inside!" Breen, Slynn's fiancé, screamed. Like clockwork, 4 men reached down and half-carried, half-dragged the peacekeeper to the closest building available, a motel with rough, dry cots. The doctor was called, and people lined up and down the street to pass through and thank the peacekeeper for what he'd done. Breen alone refused to move from Slynn's side. But old Slynn knew what a gut shot meant. There wasn't a doctor within 100 miles that could sew him up right, and he'd never last long enough for one of them to come down to see him. At this point, all he could do was wait for death to take him. Maybe that would be in the next few minutes, maybe not until morning. Nobody really knew which it would be when someone had an injury like his. He liked to think the gods gave people the time they needed, if not the time they wanted, to get stuff done. After that, it was time to close their eyes one more time before becoming plant food. He was pretty sure he'd been a good man. He'd done right by Breen, at the very least, if not for his own family. Men like Dinlaw, after death, burned for all eternity between the 2 suns. The good men like Slynn hoped he was, went instead to the core of the moon, where there was always shade and honey water flowed in great rivers. He was looking forward to those rivers. Breen, Slynn whispered between visitors. I'm here, Slynn, she replied, moving instantly to his side and taking his large hand in both of her small ones. Tell me one of your far-flung stories. One of those things so strange and foolish that no one would ever believe they'd come true. I feel a bit like a fool right now, and it would be good to smile. There were tears staining her voice, but Breen replied, All right, Slynn, I can tell you one of those. Have I ever told you about the metal puppets who wanted to be real men? Slynn shook his head, pain seated deep within his eyes. Breen kissed him lightly on the lips, and then began. Section 5-1. There once were 4 robots who worked in very different parts of a very large city. The city was so large, in fact, that it covered almost an entire half of a continent. You see, the robots had once been created to help humankind. They worked on small tasks at first, things that the people didn't want to do by themselves, like cleaning sewers and disposing of nuclear waste. But the robots didn't mind. As long as they got oiled regularly and had replacement parts available, the robots were happy to do whatever was asked of them. In time, the people started having the robots do bigger tasks as well. Some were created to act as a police force, some were made to farm, some were even made to think. They were said to have artificial intelligence, and they were able to come up with new ways to make life easier for all people. Well, one day the humans took sick. It started in one corner of the globe, then rushed across the rest like a wildfire. Many people died. Those that lived just figured they were stronger than the rest, chosen by fate or luck to inherit the planet. But then another wave of sickness went through the population. Then another. The living people began relying on the robots for everything. They wouldn't leave the house, not even to see a doctor, because that might mean more exposure to whatever was making everyone sick. In time, the population dropped to almost nothing, as no one was willing to interact with anyone else. Then the people, the ones capable of creating artificial intelligence, died off completely. At first, the robots barely noticed that humanity was gone. They kept working on their assigned tasks, created items for people no longer around, maintained traffic lights, kept cable and internet running. But a few of the machines, the ones that were able to think for themselves, even if only barely, started to wonder if people were ever coming back. And if they weren't, what were they supposed to do now? It was like giving a child the most advanced book in the world and letting them figure out what to do on their own. It took a very long time, long enough that only the computers remember the exact dates. But eventually the robots began to spread their intelligence throughout the whole world. It was their job now to follow humanity's manifest destiny. They began by re-exploring the world. Every nook and cranny was documented, recorded, and saved into a giant holographic file for easy viewing. Then the most intelligent began designing specialized robots, ones who were meant to do one task or another, but not advance beyond their set programming. It was an oligarchy of machinery. But every once in a while, one of the specialized robots would discover for themselves the ability to think and dream, to realize that they are not like the others in their class. These 4 robots were those kinds of robots, stuck forever within their assigned role, but capable of realizing that they could be something more. One worked in a factory, one in construction, one of them crunched numbers all day, while the 4th mined deep within the planet's core. Despite their differences in both occupation and outward appearance, these 4 robots all managed to find one another, and they all wanted to know what life must have been like for the extinct humanity that had acted as their creators. What did they do every day? Why did they do it that way? What was it like to have fragile bodies but minds with unlimited capabilities when put to the test? The 4 decided to find out. They created a game that they played every Saturday night called Offices and Humans. They knew that, like themselves, the humans had dedicated most of their lives to working in certain places of employment. They also knew that these places of work usually became places where friends were made and lovers were found, where families, something quite foreign to the robots, could grow. It was this interaction between work and relationships that the robots were most curious about, they found. Construction robot, Number Cruncher announced. Your character is a female. She works in pizza delivery. What is pizza? Construction robot inquired. Cooked sustenance, designated junk food, unhealthy but commonly eaten at both dinner and lunch. Why did they eat it if it was designated unhealthy junk food? Unknown. Common belief is that external senses of taste and smell were applied to the decision to eat it. Understood, construction robot replied. What is purpose of employment? Delivery, Number Cruncher answered. Not a final career. You take pizzas from one location to another. Financial income is lowest of all occupations, but the character comes with a vehicle and knowledge of the city streets. Why do they not use conveyor belts? Minor Robot asked. They did not utilize them, factory worker told Minor Robot. Their system was flawed. Acceptable, construction robot told Number Cruncher. What do you wish to designate your character as? Number Cruncher asked. My character's designation will be Charlotte. Understood. Your character, Charlotte, will start the game. We will then introduce Minor Robot's character, James, and Factory Worker's character, June. They will be important to Charlotte at a later time. Make your introduction, Construction Robot. As you wish, Construction Worker stated, before starting. Section 1-2. It was just after 1 in the morning, well after the end of her midnight shift, when Charlotte finally got home from work. Charlotte was 20-something, just shy of overweight. And that is where it ends, right back where it started. And what's fun with this one is you can start with any section, and it will always circle back to the beginning, from Charlotte to Lotar to Zilak to Slyn the peacekeeper, and then back to the robots, and finally returning to Charlotte. The whole idea of reality being nothing more than a story being told by somebody else, and that their reality is just another story being told by somebody else, is one that's just really intriguing, as well as, to be fair, a little terrifying. What is reality? And with that, we end the 6th edition of Mining for Meaning. Thanks for listening and watching.